So with that, to the main event, I want to welcome Brian, Kristen, and Greg. As I mentioned earlier, as some of us who've been in industrial for a while, trying to build startups, it is not the same as building a regular software business. The ecosystem is different, the challenges are different, and building a hardware startup is even harder. A startup in this space is even harder than normal. And so I was excited to see that PSL had partnered with Fortive to create this industrial studio. Maybe Kristen, we can start with you. As an introduction. How did you get here? What do you do for a day job? Are you a Seattleite?
How did I get here? We can go like really far back. Next essential question here, but so yes, I am in Seattle. I'm actually north of Seattle in Great Edmonds. So anyone that's ventured up to this territory, normally I would be up in Everett, not maybe. Some folks don't associate that with Seattle, but we very much consider ourselves part of the Seattle ecosystem and culture. But our headquarters are up in Everett. Fortive Corporation, we established ourselves about 4 years ago now. We actually led the separation of a bunch of industrial businesses, technology and software businesses out of a company called Danaher. Danaher is a very large industrial and medical technology company. And I have spent a good portion of my career with them, building that business and living all around the United States, working there. I am from the Pacific Northwest. I grew up, even further east, Eastern Washington. There are people that come from that side of the state. I came back out here when we formed Fortive. I love the Pacific Northwest. My regular job, I lead a corporate team that supports our operating companies. So Fortive is about a $5 billion industrial technology and software company. I can get into some of our brands, but we own a company up in the Seattle area called Fluke, which is headquartered up in Everett, which actually pioneered test tools for electricians, industrial maintenance. We created a number of the categories around being able to measure and monitor a lot of things that are really core and critical to electrical devices. We also own a business down in Portland called Tektronix that makes oscilloscopes, and so we have quite a number of our industrial businesses located out here. I grew up out in the state. I came back out here with Fortive, and I run a corporate function that we have all these operating companies, so different businesses in the portfolio, and I have responsibility for driving innovation and driving internal processes and how we work with those businesses. So the expectations we have around a broad set of things. I won't get into the other side of my life, but I deal with how we manufacture all those products, quality standards, how we drive sales and marketing process, a whole bunch of stuff. But the exciting part of what we're here to talk about is how, one of the most important things to Fortive is how do we grow these businesses? How do we build new, exciting technologies and offerings for our customers? And hence what led us to Pioneer Square Labs and what we've built here. So that's me.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm familiar with Tektronix. I lived in Portland for a while, almost in their backyard. I didn't know they were part of it.
What's super cool that people don't realize, and I wish I had the graphic ready to go, but I don't, is Tektronix spun off a lot of the technology startups from years ago that existed in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, it was such an incredible center of technology and innovation, and continues to be. So we have a history here. It's critically important to us.
Yep. No, that's awesome. Greg?
Yes, I am a Seattleite, and I've spent most of my life here, other than leaving for school. I'm a hometown boy, and just love being here. I've spent the last almost 25 years in venture capital. I was one of the founding managing directors of a firm called Madrona Venture Group. And while I was there, started some, invested hundreds of millions of dollars in various companies, in addition to starting and founding some companies. Most well known, I'm the founder. I was the initial CEO of a company called Rover, for you pet pet lovers out there. I also started something while I was at Madrona called Madrona Labs, which was the precursor to something called Pioneer Square Labs, which is the startup studio that we're going to talk about today. I'm the co-founder of Pioneer Square Labs, which is the startup studio. And then we also have a venture fund as well that invests both in companies that the studio creates, but also companies having nothing to do with the studio, just a traditional venture firm in that sense. Other things. So I've been teaching at the University of Washington entrepreneurship for the last 21 years. And actually, I'm currently teaching a class of 80 students, it was just last night. And have 3 kids, and 2 in college and 1 almost in college. So about to be an empty nester. And that's taking a little bit of thought about how that's gonna be. But looking forward to this discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a ways to go before I'm an empty nester. Brian?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. I consider myself a Seattleite now. I moved in '96 to join Microsoft, and I was a program manager at Microsoft from '96 to 2000 until I got the itch to create my first startup. Quiver is my 4th startup. The first 2 were software as a service, and I had a very distinct fear of hardware for about 15 years. And it wasn't until one of those businesses ended up at Intel that I lost that fear. And it's just been something that I can't shake. The process of designing, building, breaking, rinse and repeat is something that has captivated me, and the ability to connect with an end user in both a physical and digital way is something that keeps me up late at night and gets me up going early in the morning. But thrilled to be here and part of the discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, we have, in fact, it looks like just looking at the attendee list, we have a number of the folks who are in our hardware ecosystem here as well. So just in terms of the startup studio model, maybe Greg, you could describe the model. What is it? How does it differ from some of the other models that are out there, or the ways to get funding, get started? Incubators, accelerators. How do you compare to those?
Yeah, I think the startup studio model is a much more focused model. So whereas the Y Combinator or Techstars of the world have what are called accelerators, and the idea behind those is let's get a cohort of 10 or so companies. I've actually have been and was very involved in the beginning of Techstars here in Seattle. But the idea, we would go and we would look at many hundreds of companies and decide, hey, let's choose 10 companies. They'll come, they'll spend 3 months, and we'll do some education and a demo day, and we'll sort of help those companies sort of hopefully take it to the next level. But there'll be a group of 10, and it's it's more of a little softer touch. Startup Studio, completely different. We're starting companies from scratch, one at a time. And whether it's working with an incredible entrepreneur like Brian, or starting and doing a bunch of work ourselves initially, we're helping to build and hopefully create those companies from the very from before there's any at the idea stage, napkin stage, if you will. The idea then with Fortive was, could we take this machine that we had built at PSL? So PSL spun out 25 companies in the last 5 years, all venture funded. Well, could we take this sort of machine that we had built and work with an incredible company like Fortive to create companies that might be interesting to the kinds of areas that they're most interested in this industrial manufacturing space? And it's worked really, really well. So that's part of why I think Kirsten and I are. I think both of us are super surprised at how well it has worked. One of our goals in the first 18 months that together we would. I think we had a goal that together we would spin out one company in the first 18 months that Fortive would fund and be excited about. And we've in the first 9 months have spun out 3 companies that Fortive has backed and we have sort of that we have a lot of excitement around, of which Quiver, which we'll talk more about, is one of the exciting ones. So the idea was, could we take this model of like creating companies and work with a corporation like Fortive to make us even better, to sort of fill holes for each other. And I think it's worked really, really well. I'm totally curious what Kirsten has to say about it, but that's the,
that was my next question.
It's been a wonderful and super fun to really explore this. I know that Fortive, for example, has its own labs, its own innovation efforts, all kinds of things. And so this is what's unique about what we're doing. I think very much first in class is sort of, could we take an outside third party and work with a very innovative company like Fortive to sort of complement their efforts? And I think it's worked really well. So anyway, is that, Kirsten, would you, I'm curious for your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've exceeded what we expected here. I think that creates some interesting pressure, right? In a corporate structure of, oh, you're showing up with a lot of funding requests that we may not have expected on the time scale we are. But a couple of things I would say here. One, it's been somewhat fortuitous for us that Pioneer Square Labs and under Greg's leadership, there's been a willingness to create a very unique structure here that frankly works for us. I mean, we looked at incubators and accelerators and said, look, we're in this to build businesses that become part of the Fortive family. If in the process we come across some interesting ideas that maybe don't strategically fit with where we're trying to take the business, so be it. And we're not opposed to that. But our real intent is to build things that we want. We want to make the next Flukes and Techs and whatever, right, that we can create. And so we were pretty clear on why we were doing this, and found in working with PSL and Greg the willingness to innovate, if you will, in that model, to say, okay, let's figure out how we might do this. We did this, we launched this. I think Greg and I maybe lost a little bit of perspective on this, but we launched this whole thing and got it signed right at the start of a global pandemic. So, and we're a large corporation that was facing the realities of not only sending all of our workers to working from home, which we run manufacturing facilities, we make hardware, to customers and what was happening in our markets, right? And uncertainty around a lot of what the financial outlooks look like. We never wavered in our commitment to this and what we were doing, and our full steam ahead. And so we launched this in April. As Greg has indicated, we've had greater success than we anticipated. We have another big objective in this, which is, Greg mentioned, we have some internal innovation work that we do in a lab-like structure internally. And, it's just been an incredible journey. The learning that you get externally, the speed with which things happen, puts into question what you may think is fast internal, or what you may think is a good process internal. We've had that world really sort of rocked in some ways. And so that's been really good for us as well. We're in this to learn and to build better capability internally. And then, and I would say this to everyone here today, that we're always looking for great talent. And, Brian and others that have been part of this journey with us are critical. They're instrumental. I mean, they're the ones building these businesses and working with us. And we've got, I think, the thing that's so wonderful, and Greg said this to me, and I don't know that I believed him. I believe him now. He said to me, our limitation is going to be our access to great leaders, CEOs and founders, and people who will run these ideas. And he's absolutely right. And so, for those here today, you got some passion there, let us know, because that is absolutely something we have to constantly be building.
Yep.
I want to keep going, but I just want to give a shout out, because I think it's absolutely amazing to think back that we had been negotiating this for, again, Fortive is a larger company. So we've been negotiating this over many, many months. And then the pandemic hit. And I thought, there's no way this thing is going to happen. like all of a sudden we were in the middle of a global pandemic, and and we had decided, I think both Fortive and really the senior leadership from the CEO to Kirsten and all those, we had all sort of decided we were going to do this. But then this pandemic hit, and I was like, gosh, there's just a lot of things that changed in March. Would that change the way Fortive thought about the importance of innovation and starting these new companies? And there wasn't a hiccup. It was just like, nope. We are. It's even more important now that we're innovating than ever. You look at the companies that we created, and hopefully we'll get a chance quickly to talk about Quiver. A lot of them have to do with, wow, there's been a lot of disruption created by this pandemic. And that's difficult, but it's also opportunity, and a real credit to Fortive Corporation for seeing that and investing behind it, which I think very few companies would have done. So just amazing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's like you said, right now is the time to be innovating. You know, a lot of startups come out of the recession, right? So that's awesome. Brian, what about your experience? Why go this route as opposed to go off and start on your own, especially after 3 startups?
Yeah, it's a great question. So much time is wasted as an entrepreneur trying to validate your concept, trying to answer the question, who are you? Trying to raise the funds to make who you believe you are a reality, where you're flying overnight, or taking, in this case, in this environment, Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. So much time is wasted by entrepreneurs validating that concept and then accessing that first capital, that first tranche of capital, so they can begin to add talent and build upon that vision. And I've done it a number of different ways. And what's been so great about this partnership between PSL and Fortive is the answer to 3 questions. And the first question is, who are you? And when PSL invited me to take a look at something, it wasn't an opportunity for me to weigh in on who I thought or this concept or business should be. Greg told me, this is what this business is. And that machine that he talked about is a validation engine. And it's so different than anything else I've seen out in the venture community, because they have science and data behind validating promising concepts. So that first question of who am I is answered. Greg told me. Now the question is, can we take this idea and refine it into a business? And what is that business worth? What is the value of this thing that you're going to bring out into an industrial market? Well, Kirsten told me, well, you better get customers fast, because they're going to tell you, whether it's valuable or not you, your customer, right? And so that pressure, that corporate pressure immediately, still in a fast-paced, innovative environment, was, again, incredibly, unique. And then that third question, I think that any entrepreneur and startup has to answer is, where am I going? What are my next, what are my next decisions? And that's something we make as a group, that we're processing, improving both the validation, the customer feedback. And again, I think the giant advantage with a company like Fortive is, they have several dozen operating companies and channel. And it doesn't mean that you get a free ride into that channel, quite the opposite, but you get new data about where a probable good fit is for you to most rapidly and efficiently go to market.
Yeah, that's important, right? Other than building, just figuring out what you need to build, you also need to figure out how do you get to the customers. And this is a good way of doing that. We'll talk a little bit about the process in a little bit, but before we get to that, so just in terms of, I guess an investment thesis for Kirsten and Greg, maybe start with Kirsten. Why is Fortive putting money into this, especially in a pandemic? Is it just to learn startups, or what is the longer term goal with this?
Yeah, we have a couple of goals, and it might be helpful to understand a little bit about the Fortive portfolio. So of our $5 billion in revenue or thereabouts, we have about $1 billion that is pure SaaS, largely acquired in the last couple of years. Our business is sort of organized into 3 main industrial categories, if you will. We recently added on a big piece in the medical healthcare space. So we're one of the leading providers of sterilization equipment. While not a SaaS model, it's a very heavy recurring model because it's placement of capital, and then there's a recurring consumable with it. We have some other technology businesses in the healthcare space. We tend to love businesses that are core and critical to the operation of something. So we're in sterilization, we're in calibration of chemotherapy delivery machines and those kinds of things. So that's one segment of our business. We have another segment of our business that is around safety of workers and safety and protection of the environment. And so we have a broad range of businesses in there, from we are the standard for portable gas detection that goes onto industrial workers going into risky situations, to we make software that does environmental health and compliance tracking and reporting. We have another segment of our business that is in the reliability and maintenance space. And so Fluke actually fits into that portfolio, but we have some pure software plays there as well. And really that business, right, is moving into how do you do prediction around core assets that are in different environments and what's happening to them. I should have said 4, not 3. And then we have another collection of our businesses around facility management. So we have a number of businesses, software and hardware, in managing and maintaining facilities. And I won't get into those. And if you look at that portfolio, it's a combination of hardware and software. A large part of it is hardware, right? But that hardware is going through changes because over time, hardware will become more and more commoditization occurs in hardware, right? We still love hardware. We love the connection it makes with customers, the stickiness. We love a lot of things about hardware, but increasingly the value we're providing to our customers is coming through software, through data analytics, AI, et cetera. And so we have a simple charge here, which is a number of those businesses have an opportunity to do some pretty amazing things with customers. We sit at the center of taking a lot of data and measurements for which we can monetize and bring value to the customers in new and different ways. We're core and critical to a lot of work streams. And so the studio was for us an opportunity to say, hey, we want to really push our thinking on what's possible in some of these key strategic areas for Fortive. And we get pretty consumed internally just running those businesses. And so getting some external push on that, I think, was very refreshing for us and helpful. And we believe strongly at Fortive that who better to disrupt us than ourselves, right? Either we figure this out or others are going to figure out how to do it and bring new avenues of value to our customers. So we had a driver here around our businesses and the industries that we're in. We also, we exist in a lot of more industrial markets. Not all of our markets would be defined as industrial, but quite a few of them are. And the opportunity to make part of our brand and who we are as a company be based on innovation, and the fact that we're ahead of the curve in what we do with customers is really important to us and our company, and our CEO, Jim Lico, is really pushing that. And so we also believe that through this partnership with the studio, we would learn how to do that, and we would become better at that internally. And so there's 2 avenues to this. We have some strategic imperative in our businesses to do this. And then there's also hey, we want to invest in behaving more like this and learning what's the culture we have to encourage and build internally. How do we go about this? Where do we get in our own way, and what are we going to do about it? And so that's what led us here.
Awesome. Greg, what was the motivation? How do you see the space? You've been investing for a while. Where do you see the opportunities with industrial?
I think Kirsten really nailed it, and I think what you'll see when we talk about what Brian's doing, because I think what Quiver is where I think the opportunities are. I think it's a combination of using AI, machine learning, software, and combining that with hardware in some unique ways to solve important problems. And I think, like you said in the beginning of this, hardware is tough. It's harder to get funded. It takes longer. There's issues with it. To be able to have a partner like Fortive that reduces the risk in that area and provides some of the things that Brian mentioned really well, I think is really exciting, because I think some of the great changes and problems that need to be solved will involve a combination of hardware and software. I can't wait till Brian explains what he's doing as an example. But to me, there's just massive opportunity there. And I think the combination of sort of a startup mentality with some great assets like a Fortive brings is unique.
Yep, no, totally agree. And actually, that's a good segue to Brian. in terms of use cases. So yeah, a bit more about Quiver. What are you targeting? How did you decide on, or I guess, settle on the use cases that you have there today, and what does the future look like for you guys? I guess more importantly, how did PSL and Fortive help you?
Yeah, I'll flip over and just quick check. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's we mentioned earlier, that we've launched in a pandemic, and this pandemic has crushed so many businesses, and our own lifestyles. If we wanted to fly to see a loved one who was going under care, we were nervous about getting on that airplane. If we wanted to send our kids off to college, is it safe? If we, wanted to just enjoy our favorite ball team club, if we want to go see the Hawks, at the Lumen Field, could we do it and feel safe? A lot of those were removed. Those options were removed from us, and it was because the commercial cleaning industry couldn't answer the question, it's safe. And so one of the first categories we've been looking at, for hourly workers, is the ability, to ensure that the most overlooked hourly worker in history, a janitorial staff or maintenance worker, is given the tools to answer that question, is it safe? Is it safe for the guests to return? So our mission is to deliver AI workflows for hourly workers and make them simply more productive. We want to help teams of hourly workers avoid expensive errors by identifying problems in real time, and give them a digital trail of validation, media, and certificates. So in commercial cleaning, which is a $30 billion space that we're looking at, record keeping is shoddy at best. And we want to reduce the time to train new employees on best practices, because we know in this category, turnover is high. So we have created a sensor fusion smart camera. Now, sensor fusion is something you may have heard of related to autonomous drones and robots, a combination of optics and spatial sensors, so that you don't get bumped into, by a robot or a car or other things. We thought it'd be novel to give those super senses to humans, so that they can get a better look at a granular level of what's going on around them, the scene that they're in, the surface or objects, the material, cleaning material in this case, and motion. And that we can make them super workers that can identify exactly what's going on in their environment, be it a classroom that's being cleaned, be it an airplane cabin, be it an arena suite. So let's give those extra super senses, and it really becomes a broke detector, like what's broke in this environment. And I think, what both Kirsten and Greg, were saying is that we're not a hardware company. We're a software enhanced hardware as a service. And we're investing more in our machine learning experiments and libraries than we are the hardware, because we know it has to scale. We know that as soon as we get great at our hardware, someone else will make it in a more cheap, cost-effective fashion. So it's really our software that it has to stand the test of time. Now, that being said, we're designing some incredible reference hardware that again combines the best of both spatial, object, and optics in a wearable package that can be worn by, in this case, a commercial cleaning crew. But it's also something that we're very excited looking at Fortive's other vertical industries, because we know that detail can present new data sets for a wide variety of industries, but we're starting with commercial cleaning.
So, and how did you involve, I guess, Fortive and PSL in this process?
Well, they involved me initially. So there were, in terms of the great model between PSL and Fortive, they had a concept and they invited me as an entrepreneur and an executive to come in and refine the core concept. So the support has come in threefold. Again, the PSL team has this validation engine. So to answer that question of who are you over and over and over again, to really kind of pinpoint what's that right market entry point. And then getting in front of customers, is something that, Fortive really helped us with, both with some employees on loan to our team, but also just access and introductions. So important, I think, for any IoT or hardware startup, be testing, unit testing earlier than you think you need to. And so those have been the two areas outside of course, capital. So we're a 10-person, company with a workshop lab in Redmond, Washington. Yep.
Cool. So, Kirsten, from the Fortive perspective, Quiver is one of the companies. What are some other examples of companies, whether it's PSL or ones that it sounds like you've got other innovation projects as well? What are some of the other examples of companies that you guys have worked on, and how do you select? How does Fortive decide that this is it? We're going to put money into this or put effort into this. What's the process internally between the different business units or operating companies?
Yeah. So from the studio perspective, we have a couple of others that are really interesting. We have a business called TeamSense, which is further in its life than Quiver, which, we did some work. I think the studio moves with incredible speed to take advantage of opportunities in the marketplace. And we had this idea around, I think we were somewhat optimistic, Greg, but I think it was back in April or May, we were going to be like, we're going to be returning to offices. People are going to have to come back to offices at some point soon. And how are they going to do it safely? And so we got interested in that space and did some rapid work. And out of that, we formed TeamSense, which is a health attestation screening solution that is very unique, aimed at the deskless worker, which is a very exciting space for us. Hourly workers are core and central to a lot of the technology that we offer across Fortive. And so really what we have there, while it's serving a very important role in safety related to COVID, what we have there is an hourly worker engagement platform that has a huge amount of potential to go in a number of directions, and a team that's truly committed to what they can do to change the way companies interact with hourly workers. That business has had just an incredible run. It has, it will be crossing a 10,000 user mark here in months of existence, paying customers, very large companies, medium-sized companies. We're very happy with the traction there. And what we really like about that business, right, is it kind of creates this wedge that you can do a lot with. You can envision a lot of potential value of other things like compliance, safety of workers in other ways. Deskless workers, it's hard to communicate with them. And this provides a number of, they've done some really smart things on the tech side to make it easy to do that. And a solution that, quite frankly, they get adoption out of hourly workers. And the numbers and the adoption speaks for itself in the ease of use and what they've built here. So that's another business we built. There's another one in development that's around a work stream that's core and central to us, which is technicians bear a lot of friction in doing their jobs. And one of it is they get sent into different facilities or locations and don't always have the data necessary to enable them to make good decisions. And it's frustrating to them. And they have a lot of parts of their job they don't particularly like doing, updating work orders and other things. And so we've got some technology and development that will revolutionize that space. Here's what I would say. We have we have a number of internal innovations. I'm not quite sure where to start on that list, but here's what I think we've done smartly in the studio, which is let's find places that don't exactly, we're not sitting on top of one of our operating companies. We are finding truly standalone businesses that might someday find a right home there and value out of an existing established business we have, but they're true businesses in their own right and are bringing something that we don't have in the portfolio today. I think internally, a lot of our innovation tends to be associated with customers or workflows that we are already in versus new spaces, which I think the studio is pushing us into. I would say the other thing that, the studio has really done is, and I give testament to Brian for this, sure, there was work on an idea, but that team in a matter of, I don't remember the actual amount of time, Brian, but a month or 2 months had working hardware. Pretty sophisticated technology in place. The speed with which we do that stuff internally for a whole host of reasons, and I don't mean to air any dirty laundry of a large corporation like Fortive, but it takes us much longer to do that stuff, right? And we're just slower. And so I think the thing that we love about the studio and what we're doing is in these places where speed really matters, figuring out fast whether you have something that customers value. The studio model has really changed our frame on what you can do there.
Yep. Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
So,
and let me just say that this, back to what Kirsten said earlier, the secret to that is Brian and people like Brian. It's like, when you get a great entrepreneur to focus on a problem, the speed at which you move is exponential to consultants or larger companies that have a diverse set of responsibilities. Like the laser focus of an entrepreneur, of a talented entrepreneur on a problem, and that entrepreneur and that person's team is just, it's unmatched. And so we move, even within PSL, we've got some really smart folks, but we move, an order of magnitude faster once we bring in that right person. And in the case of Brian, as Kirsten said, like the speed at which they developed this technology that could allow you to determine whether or not an area was cleaned or not was incredible. And I think you could argue in a larger company that might have taken a year or two, and it took weeks, months, not that long. So anyway, yeah, super fun.
No, so actually, my next question is actually for you, in terms of, what is this process that we've heard of from Brian, and in terms of how do you go from an idea to then saying, okay, we need to bring a team in, like what is the process? And do you also, in this case, you reached out to Brian. What about entrepreneurs coming to you? So how does all of that work?
Yeah, about half of the time it's our ideas that we've come up with. Half the times entrepreneurs bring us ideas. We do spend a lot of time on validation. We kill over 90% of the ideas that we start. We do a lot of there's just no substitute. And Brian mentioned it, and Kirsten's pushed it. It's just, there's no substitute for just talking to customers, getting on the phone and just talking to as many customers as you can. And then using digital means, so you get some friendlies, you get some feedback, and then you start to say, hey, let's put up a landing page. Let's target some traffic. What happens? Are people interested? Oh, they are interested. Okay, let's send it to more folks. Let's retarget. So just I think it's irresponsible today. So many startups, so many large companies go right into building an MVP, or they go right into sort of, because if you're an engineer, you're most comfortable going and building something. You don't want to go to a Starbucks and talk to some random schmo, and be like, "Is this? What do you think of my idea?" Like, it's just, in some ways, it's easier to just go write code. Easier to go build something, but you learn so much when you go and just talk to customers, and if you can talk to sort of the right customers, which is what Fortive enables you to do in the case of, say, a Quiver. I mean, that's just so valuable. So you want to get out and talk to customers, and then you want to do work. And again, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or Google, they just give you these tools. Have gotten so good at allowing you to do validation in these incredibly powerful ways. So before you you don't have to guess as much as we did even a year or two ago. And we try to see if we can, again, it's not that we're always going to be right, but the data points are helpful directionally for sure.
It forces you to leave your ego at the door as an entrepreneur also. And I think for both typical software or software as a service startups, but particularly for hardware, one of the fatal flaws you can make is falling in love with your creation. as a founder, that you've had this aha moment, and then worse, you've made it look great. And then you're no longer listening to the customer. You're on this kind of, there's the risk of a white whale simplex, an Ahab going after that white whale, that it has to work. And so that pressure from PSL in the form of a validation tool never stops. Like there's not a week where we're not reevaluating and again refocusing and just making sure that we're getting the right signals to keep going. Tough in hardware because of the longer lead times, but doable because of the gift of not only mobile technology, but now also through sensor fusion and robotics. It's not that expensive to get the components, and you can make mistakes with a reasonable sum of money. Good mistakes that help guide you to the next phase.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, because you can get pretty far without writing a line of code, right? In validation, not just figuring out what you need to build, you can also figure out how you need to get to them, right? Who's going to help you? Who's going to hinder you? It's much cheaper than writing code.
I think you could figure out everything from messaging, target customer, even pricing. I mean, there's just, again, I think the tools available to us now enable a level of clarity there that was impossible to find before. And it's not perfect. It's still judgment of, luckily humans still have a role to play, and smart people like Brian, who've been around the block a bunch of time, have an important role to play, because you can get data points, but things change and there's nuance. But gosh, it's helpful to have, it's like, instead of, if you're trying to find Mount Rainier, I'd rather start in Seattle than in Augusta, Maine, or something like that, right? It's just, it gets you closer to the right spot.
Yep, no, I totally agree. And in this case, it's even more important, right? Because one of the things about at least industrial is, if you're dealing with a technical person on the customer side, you're most likely speaking a very different language from the person whose daily job you change, right? So it's important to understand that. Okay, so I have a couple of people with questions. So Brendan, I'm gonna bring you on stage first. So Brendan, if you could just tell us who you are, where do you work, and ask your question.
Sure thing. Live here. I'm an IoT industry analyst at PitchBook, and really appreciated some of the insights that Greg and Brian just mentioned about customer feedback. Brian had mentioned earlier, about looking at data along with your team for kind of go-to-market strategy and setting a course. And Kirsten also mentioned kind of the scope of customers and traction and the deskless worker industry as a reason to kind of focus on that segment. So curious for both Brian and Kirsten and Greg, you mentioned a couple sources like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Google. But for Brian and Kirsten, kind of what are some of those data streams? Can you compare and contrast, especially during COVID? Kind of which industrial segments are better to go after?
Well, I'll start. So first, obviously, if you're in the industrial segment, running tests on Facebook or Instagram aren't going to be as good a fit. And some Facebook, might be some good data. And so being able to test, positioning statements, go to market, messaging on LinkedIn is a great resource. And it is, you can get in and be, spending, less than $100 on a weekly basis, and then doubling down, tripling down as you get better signals. And so that's, I think, really important early on for an entrepreneur in terms of, am I headed in the right direction? Now, that's the, more qualitative, on the quantitative rather. On the qualitative, side, it's good old fashioned lists and lead, generation, where depending on the vertical industrial segment, you have acquired access either through private networks, or just good old, fashioned Googling, and you're dialing and contacting and cold contacting until you can conduct as many voice of the customer type interviews as you can. And then there's a conversion, into beta partnerships there.
Cool. Brandon, is that good?
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. Also curious from Kirsten if there's anything you look at, if you're able to kind of look at your customer data as to where some of those growth opportunities are, kind of comparing different segments.
Yeah, can I just make sure I understand? Are you asking specifically related to COVID, or in general where we're seeing some of these technologies create opportunities with customers and what they're trying to do?
Oh, in general, just where you see those opportunities with customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the world is changing. I think the rate of change has accelerated us on here as a result of what we've gone through. But if the expectation, Greg's gotten exposed to some of our industrial markets, and I think he's sort of perplexed on looking at some stuff and saying, hold up, it's still done that way there. Why is that seemingly so far behind some of the technologies that exist? We've looked at some areas, where we're baffled at really that's like just the way the software functions, or a customer's limited on an ability to do something. I think we're seeing significant pressure. The way we interact with technology and what we expect in the consumer world, we're expecting in business. Like, things shouldn't be harder or more difficult just because we're tied to legacy systems or heavy infrastructure that's hard to change. And so we're starting to see that, and a willingness to adopt more point solutions, best-in-class solutions, versus get yourself locked into this big heavy architecture that isn't really meeting our needs and at all the different points that we need it to. That's impacting a lot of our businesses in general and creating wonderful opportunity, I think. We're interested in a lot of the businesses we've created in the studio are interacting with a piece of the value chain in a different way. Like, a lot of our stuff is really getting down to kind of the end user, the creating value for the last mile, if you will, of like think for a minute. We are heavily in the work order management space software. I won't get into that, but we have a number. We play across verticals across Fortive. So we make that stuff for hospitals. We make it for power plants. The systems that tell you, here's what we got to go fix, facilities, assets, et cetera, and here's how we're managing that work and organizing the workforce and all that kind of stuff. That, if you were to go look at that stuff, you'd say, wow, it's not always the most user-friendly in leveraging the data streams it has, but it also hasn't really solved the last mile of how are you improving the intelligence that system enables with what the frontline worker's doing, and better improving the efficiency and productivity of that worker. And I think we're seeing the technology get pushed in that direction out of necessity. We have to do more with less. There's cost pressures in these businesses. We have a big trend in a lot of our industries, and this is true in industrial. You've got a lot of expertise we don't have replacements coming up in the system. We've got a lot of aging capability. And so, the thing we love about a lot of what we've done in the studio is it's tackling a piece of the problem that we haven't been tackling with our businesses. And I think that those trends will continue to drive our businesses and create opportunity for us. So I guess that's a sample of it. We also are seeing, I know we aren't specifically talking about some IoT stuff, but a number of our businesses are going through pretty significant impact from IoT in terms of we delivered hardware in a certain way, and that value equation is changing. And, portable test tools in some places are turning into sensors that are staying in place, or even we make portable sensors. And so the dynamic is changing there, and the value we're providing to the customer is shifting away from the taking of the measurement to the what insight am I giving you that changes decisioning or actioning or outcome. And so that's a pretty big transformation underway in a number of our businesses.
that idea of the consumerization of industry is really interesting. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Brandon. All right, I have one more. Yi. Welcome, Yi.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just a quick intro. My name is Yi. I'm a Senior Vice President at Cascadia Capital. We're an investment bank here locally in the Seattle area. I think we know Greg and Kirsten from prior conversations. So my question kind of is similar to Brendan, but asked a different way, is really when you look across Industry 4.0 and even particularly across IoT, what technologies and maybe end use cases are you guys looking at specifically within your own organizations? And I guess, Kirsten, you did talk about, safety. You talked about predictive maintenance, facility maintenance. I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit more. And then, Greg, also curious what you guys are seeing at Pioneer Square.
Kirsten, you.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out, given the diversity of our portfolio, where the best place is to go here, because there's a lot of examples of where we're seeing the technology push. So, we have a part of our business that is actually, it's called Sensing Technologies. It's a collection of businesses that all we make is sensors, and those sensors and what we I won't get into some of this, but those sensors and what they unlock of what we can do for a customer is radically changing due to the technology. A lot of it is AI and big data enabled. And so we have built an internal analytics team that's at the corporate center that supports our operating companies and sort of the sophisticated data modeling that gets built to support the products and the vision of what we're delivering for customers. And so a recent example of that, we've released some technology relevant as we go through the pandemic we have some interesting sensors that do things around air pressure and monitoring of air quality. Well, monitoring of air quality has become incredibly important in intensive care units associated with COVID and surgical sites. And so we have increased our ability now to predict when we're heading into a situation where a procedure should not continue, depending on what's happening in that room. And so that's an example of, we've built data sets over time. The hardware, the sensor piece is important to it, but really it's that back end of intelligence and how we're able to bring it to deliver value to the customer. That's really important. We now are we, believe it or not, sit behind most of the construction data in the United States that gets used by municipalities and contractors. We own the business that collects all of that and has all of that, right? And historically, their value proposition was providing access to that to folks. And now the value proposition is very different. It's about prediction. It's about managing investment and building of facilities and where do you do it relative to cost profiles. And so I think we're just seeing a transition in what is available to us, given the technology, the ability of the data models, the algorithms that we can build to help our customers in new and different ways. And I could continue to go on with examples of businesses we're building or have in the portfolio that are centered around that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, what I think is so fun about being alive, I was just sort of reflecting, I think all of us on this call, if we were born a couple hundred years ago, I can't see everyone's picture. I don't think there's a lot of people that would be best in the world at picking up big rocks and moving them long distances. So we probably wouldn't be so lucky as we are now, because there's just a lot of value on building things and being innovative and creative, and it's just so fun. And the thing that's so fun too is that these things never change, right? That there's just anytime people, every couple of years or someone writes an article, "Oh, are all the ideas, is technology dead?" I mean, I can't, I've been doing this for, over 20 years now. I probably read it at least 100 times. There's no more good ideas left. Technology is dead. There's not, and you're just you got to be kidding me. And so what I love to think about are just our trends and how that are happening and how they impact opportunities. So a lot of the companies, for example, that the studio with Fortive has started are directly a result of what's been happening with COVID and that creating a wedge for us in certain kinds of ways. I think the explosion and increase in AI and machine learning and how that's just getting better and better, just creating an automation, creating so much change that is so interesting, especially in legacy businesses. You look at PSL's general portfolio, a very large percentage of it is legacy industries and how automation and ML it changes things fundamentally. Future of work. I mean, how interesting, like, are we all going to go back when this pandemic hopefully ends at some point? We're just going to all go back to 5 days of work, days a week, back in the office, or is it going to fundamentally change in different ways? And then what are the implications of that, not just for us who are workers, but like for the retail establishments and how they survive and the other kinds. I mean, there's just technology and change has never been more relevant or important. And I think as you're thinking about where to put your weight, I think the interesting thing is just to really think about major trends and how those are going to impact sort of these opportunities. And it doesn't have to be like COVID will end, but some of these trends can provide wedges where you can sort of get into a space and then from there you have permission to build beyond that. But that, to me, that's super exciting, is to think about all this change that's happening around us and what opportunities come from that. And it's just super exciting. I sent Kirsten an email the other day about electric vehicles. And I was like, and I was just like, hey, and some of these announcements that some of these what does that mean that some of these car companies are going to make these kinds of pronouncements that we're going to move to more electric vehicles? And what does that mean for all the infrastructure and how we think about IoT in that aspect? And what are the opportunities that not today, but in 3 or 4 years are going to be most interesting because of that? Anyway, just lots of fun stuff to think about.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Definitely see the electrification and digital transformation as two major themes across what we see in the emerging tech space. So thank you for that, guys. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you, Yi.
Thanks, Hans.
Here's one more person. Okay. Milan? Yeah, I think what Kristen said earlier in terms of Greg's reaction, finding out that things were so backward, I can relate to that. I had that too. Just 3 years ago, walking into one of the biggest CPG companies' factories and seeing people walking around with clipboards and tracking things on a whiteboard. And they're a global company. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities everywhere, especially in industrial.
Well, Hans, let me tell you a story. A recent one. It wasn't with Fortive, but I was at a healthcare facility and I heard this noise in the background, and I'm like, "What is that?" We were interviewing. This is with the CIO. I was like, "What is that? No, what is that?" "Oh, those are fax machines." I said, "What?" "Yeah, those are fax machines. We do our staffing. We still use fax." I go, "You still use fax machines?"
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I left. I'm like, okay, thank you. That's opportunity. Anytime you go to a place that's still using fax machines, that is like a bat hitting you in the face, saying this is an opportunity, because like people still use fax machines. Yeah. To your point.
All right, Milan, go for it.
Greg, I would like to thank you for segueing into my question, because it wasn't directly related to what you guys are talking about in IoT, but I think I want to bring this up because I find it's an issue. I find it from employee looking for opportunities issues, and I keep talking about this with all my friends, and I find the same thing over and over again. So long story short, I applied for Fortive several times. I worked as a mechanic with all their devices, and I'm just using the story to show one point or one data point. And I'm trying to get into project management, and I think I'm a good candidate because I've worked with their tools as a mechanic, so I'm pretty close to the customer, or I was the customer. So there's a disconnect in the HR world where you can't find good talent because now everything's open. You can apply to 10,000 positions in a month, and then you get such a big influx of employees applying for a job that you got to sift through it. So now you're kind of, instead of sifting through all the good resumes and bringing those up, you just get less resumes. So on your guys' hand, you're not getting the best employees out there. So my question is, do you see the changing trends with COVID and everything happening, that this is going to get addressed? Because you can get all the customers and get the great product, but unless you have employees to support this and to support your growth, you're kind of dead in the water. So what do you guys see this, and are there particular challenges between an established company like Fortive and an upcoming company or startup?
Maybe I'll jump in here and get started, and Greg, you can add to it. I mean, I think there has historically been a different profile, right, of who finds the startup environment attractive versus maybe the larger, more established company, and we've certainly seen some of those nuances. But we're increasingly realizing that the underlying mindset and skill set is critically important in different aspects of our business. There's always a diversity of people that we need at Fortive, given the scope and breadth of our businesses, and that will continue to be true. But when it comes to innovation and pushing the creation of new offerings or doing something disruptive with technology, that profile that we look for in the studio is very similar to what we look for inside of Fortive. I do think and my advice to you is, you now know me, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy. Greg and I are always looking for great talent for our businesses, and me as well for Fortive. But I think it is a challenge for us to figure out the right fit of person. I think we have I think a good system in the studio, in that I think the studio has helped us, and Greg and the team bring a lot of expertise here in matching up the Brian kind of passion and motivation and ability to get stuff done at incredible rates and to build a business with good ideas. And that's the winning spot that we want to find ourselves in. And I don't think that we, Fortive, are as experienced. Greg and his team have just done it many times over. They've formed many more startups than we have as Fortive. And so we're learning a lot from them on this journey. I do think what we're seeing coming through a pandemic, just to be clear, is not unlike what our universities are seeing, which is a massive increase in people applying for jobs, the ability to sort of go out and look and for different options. And so I'm not surprised to hear, although I'm not directly close to it at Fortive, that there probably is an inundation of our HR folks in filtering through this and figuring out how to find the best talent. But we're always trying to get better at it. We're trying to ensure that we find the right DNA that fits with, there's some unique things we didn't talk about Fortive in this forum about what we believe in continuous improvement and things that we do. But, my advice to you is don't give up, because I believe the folks that are persistent, that have something to prove, will eventually find their way into the right place at Fortive. And we care a lot about finding that talent.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm more curious for Brian, in terms of if he has advice in terms of for new folks, because he's been hiring a bunch of engineers and stuff, and how to differentiate yourself. I think it's hard in an environment where there is, there is a lot of, as Kirsten said, a lot of folks looking, and I think it's really important to be differentiated in how you present. Assuming you meet a certain bar for what someone's looking for, then even within that, then there's hundreds of people. Then how do you differentiate within that bucket? And it's hard. And I think the best advice is what Kirsten said, which is be persistent. But Brian, you may have better insight.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely definitely reach out on LinkedIn, directly, or Brian at quiver.ai. I'd be happy to, talk to you. I think two things. So with a startup, either you have a genuine need for a specialist, an antenna designer, for example. Everyone else better be a generalist, right? Because you just don't know as you go in week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter. And those individuals who are adaptive to the changing data sets, coming into the business and are happy about that, happy to try new things, happy to pitch in, even though it wasn't in their job description. In a startup environment, particularly in the first kind of 15, 20 employees, those are the ones who are going to last. And they're really part of a team. They understand the mission and vision of the company. And we have a motto in the company, which is a motto for our product and a motto for one another, which is be helpful, not watchful. And for our products, it's because we don't want our workers who are wearing our optics to feel like they're being watched or spied upon. And we want to genuinely deliver that helpfulness in terms of real-time knowledge transfer. But it applies to us, too, as a team, which is, are we hooking one another up? So be tenacious. Don't take no for an answer, until it's time. To say no when you realize that, so to make sure you have thick skin and keep trying, and then prove, if you're interested in the startup, that blood, sweat, and tears is okay, and that you're willing to do things that maybe you didn't necessarily sign up for.
And the only other advice I will say that because I've talked to a lot of our CEOs about this, which is there is a little bit of a premium right now on people that you worked with before. And the part of the reason for that is when you can't meet someone face to face quite as much or spend as much time face to face, you don't have that trust-based. I mean, there's something that Zoom misses or these video things miss. And so I was going to give you advice too. I'd go back to some of the places you've worked before, maybe some people that you've impressed in the past. And now's the time to reach. They're probably looking for folks that they also trust and stuff, and leverage some of those past experiences, because right now there's a premium on because again, if I'm working with you, but I'm not in contact with you all day like I would be normally, I got to trust that you're doing the right thing, even though I can't see you and manage you quite as closely. So if I know from past experience that you're a hard worker, that you show up on time, that you do the work, that you're proactive, I'm more likely to make a hire than in that context. So just FYI, in terms of where I might be thinking about, hey, do you have some past people that you worked with that loved you?
Yeah, I appreciate your guys' answers. I didn't really want to turn this question into give me some personal advice, but what I heard from what you guys were saying is it is a challenge, especially when you're remote with people. So looking for good talent is a challenge, and you guys are going to work on trying to figure this out. And I'm trying to stay positive. I know there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of this COVID thing. We're going to learn how to do a lot of new things in a different way just because we're forced into it. As I heard at a conference recently, colleges were trying to go online for 30 years and they managed to do it in 6 months because they had no choice. So I appreciate your guys' feedback. It sounds like everybody's trying to figure this out, including the companies that are trying to bring out the product. So it's not just keeping in touch with the customers. It's challenging because you can't do it face to face, but also getting good talent is about the same challenge because you're distance, and we have to figure out how to do this to work together. One thing I like to shout out Hans is I would have never met all of you guys if we couldn't do this virtually. So I'm very grateful we have the opportunity to do this, because us bumping into each other and sharing ideas was a lot harder when we had to commute and actually drive to places, and things took precedent. But now when you don't have to waste the time to drive somewhere, it's a lot easier to meet people. So I see this as a positive outcome of this video world we're living in. So thank you.
That's very, that's very true. No,
I think, is it me? Is it me? Have we lost Hans? Is there
one of the best ways. Okay, Stuart. Oh, he disappeared. There you go.
Hi, sorry about that. I clicked on the wrong button.
No worries. Go for it.
Yeah, so this is a great talk. I really appreciate everything you guys have had to say. One of the things I'm curious about, Greg, this is probably great for you to answer, but Brian also, doing test marketing ahead of time, like, talking to customers a ton, like finding the customers, talking with them, doing the landing page analysis and the advertising analysis before you ever write a line of code. All of that totally makes sense. At the same time, there's value in getting feedback from customers early on, give them a product, let them play with it, let them use it, and start that virtuous cycle of getting the feedback from the customers, actually using the product, not just talking about it in concept, but actually using it. How do you balance that? I mean, I know that there's a lot of people on this meeting that are engineers and they just want to sit down and write code. So there's always that temptation to I just want to build it, see if it actually works. Validate, can this technology be built? What do people do when they have it? At the same time, we know that we should do the talking to the customers and the market testing ahead of time. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Well, I think. Oh, were you going to say something, Brian?
Yeah. I'll just start by saying with hardware, if we're talking about IoT, it just forces you to be brutal on which features you're going to build first, right? And so again, we can all fall prey to the big picture with hardware and the kitchen sink design. And so I would just encourage you to really, again, be brutal with the feature set that you're actually going to enable through a physical device, and think about it in terms of a successful sprint, where you whether it was a button working or whatever that kind of key combination of things for either human factors research, or end data collection or whatever happens, just be brutal and get it to a point where even though it has 80% more things that you want to do to it, you'll find out right away whether that kind of core and simple set of functionality is going to be worth a trade in the future, a trade for learning new things in exchange for dollars, right?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Stuart. So I think in the beginning, you just get on the phone, you talk to folks, and then you set up some, you can do some different things. Ultimately, especially with hardware, you're going to want to see some kind of mocks or some kind of prototype. Let me tell you two quick stories. There's a great story about Jeff Bezos with Kindle, and they were presenting. By the way, Kindle had a lot of false starts, and the team, and I know the team that sort of launched that, and the team was presenting to him, and they had all this customer data and market data and blah 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 blah, and then they were like, and he just kept saying, "Well, where's the mocks?" And they said, "Yes," but he's like, "Where's the mocks?" Yeah, where's the? He wanted actually. What I want to see. What I don't even understand. What? Yes, I get. Customers might want to read it. Where? Show me. I can't. So I think you can do. Where's the mocks? It's interesting. And Kirsten did the same thing to Brian when we were going to go and present to Jim. The CEO of Fortive, who's fantastic, and we were going to go and make a presentation to him. And I just remember Kirsten saying, we need to move the picture of what this thing is way to the front of the deck, because otherwise people aren't going to get a sense of what it is. You got to, what it is, so that they can sort of in their mind sort of picture that. So I do think you don't need to necessarily build, a physical thing to some great detail, but mocking something up, maybe a little prototype, or even as Brian did so beautifully, with some really definitive kind of drawings, can make a really big difference when you're starting with an idea. And Kirsten was like, because Brian originally sort of was like, here's all the market, and he had kind of some of those stuff towards the latter end of the deck. She's like, move that all the way up, because people are going to want to see what it is that that we're thinking about making here. And I thought that was really powerful advice, because of course we all knew what it was, so it was sort of not. But if you hadn't sort of seen it for the first time, getting being able to actually show that a little sooner than you might otherwise, I thought was right after it was like sort of problem. Okay, what's the solution? Then let's actually look at this thing, as opposed to getting into okay, here's how many people might, anyway. Hopefully that's helpful.
It is. So Brian, in your case, how long did you guys do customer interviews and test marketing before you actually built hardware? And what was the trigger that started making you actually build hardware?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I think there was, I don't know whether it was 6 weeks or, something even before, part of it had begun. This is part of the PL validation engine where there had been prospective customer interviews happening even before I joined. And it continues to this day. It's just normal, right? We're always wanting to talk to, prospective new customers and feed that into our development pipeline. In terms of building, we started, once we got enough, data, let's call it over a dozen qualitative, in-depth interviews where we felt like, okay, let's using over-the-counter parts, not even DigiKey stuff, just parts that you can buy on Amazon. Let's assemble, some of this and put it in a real-world setting. We were doing that, certainly in the first 30 days. For us, but we knew that there wasn't an existing device that collected the data that we needed. And so we invested in the time and materials for a reference design. We expect in the future that there'll be other sensor devices that could also feed into our system, but that we were going to put that together, and we were doing that, pretty quickly. But again, we were spending, less than $1,000 on parts, that had the right software, firmware, developers to be able to do interesting things with that.
Yeah. So your initial budget was very small, less than $1,000, and your
thousands of dollars. Yeah. I mean, in terms of buying components, and hooking them up together.
And then from last question then to finish this, from when you guys started building hardware to when you first put it in the hands of a quote unquote customer, how long was that?
It was 90 days.
Nice.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. So Brian and I actually talked about having him come back and share the whole story with being a hardware entrepreneur as part of our entrepreneur stories. So that was the last question. I was hoping it would be done at 1, so we'd have time for some networking, but this was a great discussion and I didn't want to stop it. Thank you very much. This was really good. I think it was very informative. It looks like from the feedback in the chat as well, people found it quite useful. I'm going to hang around in the lounge until 2 o'clock when I end this session. If you want to hang around, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I want to thank Greg, Brian, and Kirsten for taking the time today and sharing more about the joint venture between PSL and Fortive. And I'm sure this won't be the last time we see you guys. Hopefully, you'll be coming back with more companies, and we'll stay in touch. But thank you. And you're welcome to stay, hang out if you want to check out the lounge as well.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.